Hello once again, everybody, and welcome back here to Sports Radio, WNML.com for NFL in a Flash. With Joel Silverberg, I am Eric Kane, and Joel, we'll start in Nashville. An embarrassing home loss, 21-0 shutout at the hands of the Baltimore Ravens. One more sack on Mariota than completions thrown by Mariota, 10-11. The club record was 12 sacks given up. They nearly broke that. What can you say about that abysmal performance by Tennessee, and where do they go from here?
Well, now you're in a spot where for Tennessee it's their first really, really bad game of the season. They've obviously had some tough losses already to Miami, to Buffalo, but at least in those games they were competitive. They were one-score losses. They were games that Tennessee had chances to win. Doesn't mean that they were necessarily games that Tennessee played well, but for the first time this season, Tennessee had nothing going on either side of the football. You mentioned the sacks. Don't forget on defense, you couldn't really get after Joe Flacco, and you couldn't stop Baltimore on third down. Baltimore was completing third and 17 at one point when it was still a two-score game. And I think for Tennessee, you have to reset quickly because this was an opportunity in a 2-week stretch against Buffalo and Baltimore where you had an opportunity to really put a dent in the division, especially with Jacksonville losing 2 straight. And now you look ahead at the schedule, the Chargers in London. You have to go to Dallas. You have to play New England when they're starting to find their rhythm. So you had an opportunity to collect wins early so that way you could kind of stock up for the winter, so to speak, before the really tough stretch here in November. But for Tennessee, you have to rebound quickly, or otherwise the division's going to get away from you quickly, with Houston having won 3 straight as well.
The highest paid offensive lineman in NFL history, and Taylor Lewan on one side. You have Jack Conklin on the other side, a former All-Pro and top 10 pick. 16% of Tennessee's payroll is accounted for the offensive line. Those are your two kind of your staple points of that line, but do you maybe see any change up in the guard center position? Ben Jones, 11 sacks, inexcusable. It was a bad game, but should there be reason for concern about going out and finding someone else?
Not quite yet. I think Baltimore did a really nice job at scheming against Tennessee, and Paul Kaharski did a great job at breaking this down. Only 3 of those 11 sacks could actually be contributed to the offensive line. There were a couple that should be contributed to the running backs failing to pick up blocks, and then 3 more that were on the fault of Marcus Mariota for not getting rid of the football. There were a couple of sacks where it seemed like, man, he normally squeezes out of that, and just seemed like he wasn't aware enough in the pocket that pressure was coming from. So especially when you look at how Tennessee's offensive line had done through the first 5 games this season, they had done a good job of giving Mariota protection. Run blocking still, I think, needs to get a lot better because you're relying too much on Lewis and Henry to make plays on their own, and so the blocking has to get better in short yardage situations. But for right now, I wouldn't make any changes yet, but I would have some caution flags up because if this continues, especially in London, then some changes probably need to be made.
Stay in the AFC and slow out of the gate. The New England Patriots started 1-2, I believe. It's since won every game, and they're looking back to Belichick and Brady standards. Of course, they got Edelman back. Gronk's healthy. They signed Josh Gordon. They're starting to roll there in Foxborough. They just took down previously undefeated Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill. Would you say that New England now is kind of back at that number 1 spot? And do you think that that game could be the result in the number 1 seed in the AFC?
Yeah, it could potentially get to that point. We've seen this from New England before, a couple of losses out of the gate, and then they get rolling and they get things clicking and they get somebody back from suspension in week 5, and so then they start going from there. But no, and I think for Kansas City, it's as close to a good loss as you can get. They showed up and they put 40 points up on New England at their home stadium in primetime football. There wasn't much you could ask for out of Patrick Mahomes. So typically in games like that, you look at a young quarterback and say, well, he got his first real taste of real competition under the lights against a really good football team, and he just didn't show up. He made some mistakes early and didn't roll over. They scored 9 points in the first half and came back and lit up New England's defense. So I think for Kansas City, you have to be happy with where that could go. And keep in mind, while we're talking about number 1 seed in the AFC, Kansas City, we still got 10 games left to play. They do still control their own destiny with a game in hand over New England.
Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes, is there a better duo wide receiver quarterback connection in the National Football League right now?
It'd be tough to find one.
Historically, yes, but right now.
Yeah, right now, through the 6-game stretch, you'd be hard-pressed to find one because I think Ben Roethlisberger has not played his best football consistently, even though the connection that he has with Antonio Brown. I do think there are a lot. The offenses are flying so far in the first month and a half of the NFL season, but if I had to pick one duo, I think Hill and Mahomes is probably your most deadliest combination.
Yeah, talk about the offense Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football both. I think Sunday Night Football was a combined 83 points. Last night, a 30-33 final, so offenses are rolling there. I said last week kickers are either the hero or the GOAT. Last week, Mason Crosby missed everything he kicked. Last night, he made everything he kicked. He was, I believe, 4 for 4 on field goals, including the game winner. Joel, you kicked a few field goals back in your day. What's the mentality like for a kicker, and how can it be so bad in a dome setting, and then he played so well out in the freezing cold tundra?
Yeah, I think part of it has to do with the way that the Packers responded. Mike McCarthy said that he didn't have any doubts about Mason, and Aaron Rodgers said in the postgame last night, as well as Mason did, he said that the team just kind of wrapped their arms around him and embraced him and just told him that he's the guy. And he had an abysmal season a couple years ago, and the Packers stood by him, and then he hit 2 50-plus yard field goals in key situations in a playoff game against Dallas, which was one of the best playoff games we've ever seen. And so for Crosby, yeah, the game-winning field goal was only 27 yards, but he hit a 51-yarder earlier in that contest and was kicking it really well and said he was striking the ball really well. So it's just a matter of when you have a veteran kicker like that has some time and is given a chance, is able to come back. But a big part of that has to do with the confidence that the organization had in him. Like we saw with Zane Gonzalez from Cleveland earlier, he has 2 bad games, and he's a young kicker who hasn't established himself yet, and he gets cut, and the Browns go in a different direction. So part of it is the fact that he's a veteran, and the other part of it is the fact that the team has to have confidence in the kicker, and they did, and the Packers were rewarded for it.
A lot of guys making plays across the National Football League in Week 6. For my playmaker of the weekend, Joe, I'm going to go with Aaron Rodgers. He back-to-back games of 400 yards passing. Last night on Monday Night Football, he had 3 receivers that tallied over 100 yards receiving. So quite a showing there. That just doesn't happen much. So I'm going to tip my cap to Aaron Rodgers. What about you?
Antonio Brown, a game-winning touchdown catch in the final 10 seconds of regulation in a division against a division opponent on the road, a game that you needed after the slow start. That's the sort of win that can really turn a season around for Pittsburgh after all the off-season noise that they've had with Le'Veon Bell, and you have James Conner playing good football for them. Antonio Brown makes a huge play towards the end of the game. So call him what you will. He's a character, he's a personality, but he made a big play, and Steelers fans are a lot happier this week because of it.
Week 6 was here. Now it's gone. Week 7 coming up. Titans will play the Chargers in London, a 9:30 Eastern kickoff Sunday morning. With Joel Silverberg, I'm Eric Kane. This has been NFL in a Flash on Sports Radio, WNML.com.